So what I wanted to do in today's video was take you through some of my favourite winter car detailing and cleaning tips to hopefully make this process a little bit easier and more enjoyable at this time of year. So I'm going to be taking you through some things that I do to adjust my process and also some of my favourite products to use here too. Now, first things first, obviously, when it is winter, it is not the most enjoyable time of year to be cleaning a car because you get pretty cold, so obviously layering up is massively important. But one thing that I do think that's really important when you are layering up is to make sure you don't really use anything that have kind of zips or buttons along the front, unless you are very, very conscious when you're leaning over the car to create a bit of space between you and the vehicle. The risk of you sort of dragging a zip over that panel is a little bit too high for my liking. So I personally go with a pullover hoodie most of the time over the top just to make sure that I'm not scratching the car accidentally. Now, the second thing is about keeping your hands warm. Now, this one is very, very hard to do, obviously, if you are dunking your hands in a bucket throughout most of the wash process. As soon as your hands get wet, you're pretty knackered when it comes to keeping them warm. However, I do have some gloves here, which I have found really, really useful. So these are DexShell Neo Therm Fit waterproof gloves, or some arrangement of those words. I will obviously link these and everything else that I'm going to talk about in the description as well. But these are, like I said, waterproof gloves. They are knitted, so they do feel a little bit warmer. I've had these for a couple of years now and they are really, really beneficial, and I would not be without them. So the third thing that I wanted to talk about was getting things all set up before you start cleaning the car. So I personally like to fill up my IK sprayers, anything else that I'm using that's dilutable in my foam cannon and things like that. And I also do fill my buckets at the start as well. I find that getting all this done just really helps to streamline things. That when I'm actually cleaning the car, I can get things done a lot faster and I don't have to spend quite as much time out in the cold. So now on to my first of the kind of chemical recommendations when it comes to cleaning cars in winter. Now, usually at this time of year, your cars are getting a lot dirtier. There's going to be obviously road salt on the cars, but also just a lot more traffic film due to the wet weather. So I find that upping the pre-wash is really important here to try and strip off as much of that dirt as possible before the contact wash. So it's not really the time of year to be using pH neutral snow foams on their own, as they don't generally tend to do all that much. Now, there is a bit of a concern when using a higher alkaline pre-wash that it can degrade the wax or sealant that you might have on the vehicle. I personally don't think this is a massive concern to have, as it's a lot easier to top that up, and I will talk about my recommendations for that too, than it is to go ahead and have to polish swirl marks out of your car because the pre-wash has gone wrong and you've inflicted a load of damage during the contact wash because the car wasn't clean enough. So I personally think having a higher pre-wash strength is the best way to go here. So in terms of my recommendations for that, you can just use a snow foam to do this, but you are going to need something with a decent bit of kick to it. In this case, I recommend something like Squid Ink Alcafroth, which I've got here, or the Garage Therapy Snow Foam, both of which have really good cleaning ability. The Built Hamber foams are good too, although I have run out of those recently. Now, if your car is really dirty, then you can pop a citrus pre-wash on the lower sections, which are typically the area that gets the most grimy, and this will help to soften that dirt a little bit. You can then pop your snow foam over the top, and this should help to really get the car as clean as possible for the contact wash. I find that applying a pre-wash to a dry panel typically works better, and also it just speeds things up. Now, when it comes to the contact wash, if you are going with a 2-bucket method, then putting a bit of warm water in your bucket is certainly not going to do any harm. Now, don't go with hot water, that's not really going to be a good idea. But if it's just a little bit warmer, then it will help to keep your hands a little bit warmer too. So if you have access to an outside hot water tap, obviously that's brilliant. If not, just chucking a kettle in it at the end is actually quite useful. Just fill it up with cold water most of the way, chuck a kettle in, and that works pretty well. However, during this time of year, I do actually find the multi-mitt method of contact washing actually a little bit better than the 2-bucket method. And the main reason for this is that it is just a lot quicker. So I can basically apply a shampoo through a foam lance, which is really good, again, to add a little bit more lubrication. I find that it's a touch better compared to when just used in a bucket. So I can just spray the whole car with the foam lance and then use 1 microfiber mitt per panel to clean it, and then just put that in an empty bucket. And although it creates a bit more washing, I do get around the car a little bit quicker doing it this way. So one thing to note though, if you do go for this foam lance method of contact washing, is to not use the snow foam that you used previously, as they don't offer much lubrication, so obviously the risk of causing scratches and swirl marks is much higher. But instead, you can put your shampoo in the foam lance. Most typically work quite well using this method, and starting at a 1:9 dilution is usually a good place to go from, and you can always go a little bit higher or lower from there. Now, I typically do just go with a pH neutral pure shampoo for most washes. However, at this time of year, when there is a lot of salt build-up on the car, I do find it useful to occasionally use an acidic shampoo as well. I typically won't use it more than once a month, but I do find it really good at unclogging ceramic coatings which have these mineral deposits and this salt build-up. But also you can use them on cars which do just have waxes and sealants on them instead. Just be mindful though that the protection might take a little bit more of a hit here and you might need to top it up afterwards. Now in terms of my recommendations for acidic shampoos, I've got the Garage Therapy DMS and CarPro D-Scale. Both of these are great and you can't really go wrong with either of them. Now when it actually comes to topping up the protection on the car, I do find that waxes and sealants generally struggle a little bit more in the colder months, as generally anything below sort of 5 degrees Celsius, I do find that they struggle to cure and they can go a bit streaky and smeary, and you generally tend to run into more issues using them. So my favourite product for this time of year to keep that protection topped up is a spray and rinse sealant. So I have two different examples here to show you. I've first got Geon Wet Coat, which is great for just spraying onto a panel and topping up maybe a couple of dead patches that you've got maybe on the lower sections. Or if you need to apply protection to the entire car, then using something like a foam lance sealant is a little bit better, as obviously it is a bit quicker to do. So this one here by Yum Cars, this is Foam Plus. That is a really good one to look at. It does add quite a bit of gloss and slickness, and the self-cleaning on it is really good too. One thing to note though, if you are going to use one of these foam lance sealants, is to make sure you do flush your foam cannon through with water afterwards, as this can just help to stop it getting clogged up with product residue. An alternative approach to apply some protection, and you can combine this with the drying stage, is to use a quick detailer at this point to help wipe the car down. This is obviously going to be one of the fastest methods to do so if you are going to be using a towel to dry your car, but just keep in mind that a lot of products will clog up the towel, so make sure you are washing it with a decent detergent pretty quickly after you've finished cleaning the car. Now if you do have a glass sealant or coating applied to your car as well, you're probably going to be using the wipers a bit more at this time of year, so it can really kind of degrade that coating. Now what I would recommend doing is keeping it topped up with a hydrophobic glass cleaner. Spray and rinse products don't generally tend to work as well on glass and can occasionally cause wiper judder and a few other issues, so I generally don't tend to apply them directly to glass. Instead I will use something like the Soft 99 Glaco cleaner. This one's really good and quick to apply, never leaves any streaks, and I'll typically use it every few weeks and it keeps my glass coating going pretty much indefinitely. So definitely a product worth looking at if you are using a glass coating and struggling to make it last throughout winter. Now speaking of keeping your glass clean, obviously at this time of year there is a risk that the screen wash in your car is going to freeze, so I would say it's definitely worth investing in a decent one. The one I'm using at the moment is by High Definition Detail. This is called Hydrology. You can use this as a de-icer as well, but it works really well against the cold weather. So if you dilute it at 3:1, you get protection down to -5 Celsius. You can actually use it neat as well and it will protect down to -15, but that's not typically something that I need in the UK. So at this time of year as well, it can be quite difficult to keep your tyres looking sort of nice and fresh, even if you apply a tyre dressing after each wash. It really depends on which one you're using, and some of them don't typically last too well in wet weather. So I like to use something a bit more durable, and one of my favourites at the moment for that is CarPro Dark Side. It does leave a pretty glossy finish, so if you are looking for something a bit more satin, then you can take a look at things like Yum Dress, Garage Therapy Tyre Serum and Autoglans TT Serum. These are all really nice as they don't leave quite a sort of flashy finish, although on a single application I do think that has better durability. When you use those other products that I mentioned, they generally tend to build up over multiple layers and can offer quite significant amount of protection long term if you do use them that way. Now when it comes to packing away your stuff at the end of the wash process, one of my best tips here is to make sure you disconnect everything from your tap so that when you come to use it, if it is stuck in the shade, it doesn't freeze up, so I just disconnect all the fittings. And then also with your pressure washer, make sure if you can you are storing it inside and draining the pump after you use it. So just pull the trigger after you've disconnected the water and it should splutter out the residual water that's in there. But also really storing it inside is the best thing you can do, as otherwise obviously it can freeze inside the pressure washer and crack some of the internal components, particularly on lower end pressure washers. If they have plastic pumps, that's obviously the main issue. But even on higher end pressure washers, it's important to look after them as well. So my Cransel lives inside at this time of year. And it's one of the best things you can do really to keep your pressure washer nice and healthy. Now next up is about product storage. So if you're like me and you're storing all your chemicals in your garage or your shed, then some of them could benefit from coming inside if it is going to get particularly cold. Now I do have a lot of chemicals, so they obviously don't all come inside at this time of year. That wouldn't be practical. But my ceramic coatings and some of my spray sealants do come inside if it is going to get below freezing, just to make sure nothing happens to them, as if they freeze it can affect the chemistry sometimes. Other products though, like my wash products, citrus pre-washes, snow foams, wheel cleaners and things like that, I'm not really as bothered about. They can look a little bit different over winter. You might notice your shampoo go a bit cloudy and things like that, but typically I don't find them to affect the performance really. Now the final tip here is about interior cleaning, and most of my process remains the same throughout winter and summer when it comes to actually detailing the inside of the car. However, one thing that I don't do quite as often is do really thorough wet vac extractions if I don't absolutely have to, as it can take a really long time for the seats to dry out. If you are doing wet vac extractions at this time of year, then make sure you do them at the very start of the process, just after vacuuming, to give yourself as long as possible. Obviously do your interior first, then your exterior, and that obviously will help. But I find that I use my steam cleaner a lot more if I can, as obviously it does keep me a little bit warmer too, but I do find that it can provide a good level of cleaning, but without really sort of saturating any fabrics and making them take ages to dry out. Now, as I said, I will be linking all the products that I've mentioned in this video in the description. If you have got any other detailing tips that you'd like to share for this time of year in the comments, then it would be great to hear them too. And if you have enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you could drop it a like, and thanks for watching.